10 years after my return to Chantaburi, I felt happy with the results of my efforts at Crystal Mountain Monastery. The growing number of forest monks under my guidance was a good indication that Ajaan Mun's forest monastic lineage was firmly taking root in the southeast. Shortly after the end of the 1960 rainy season retreat, I left the monks I'd trained in charge of Crystal Mountain Monastery, bid farewell to my family, and stepped onto the forest trail leading to the northeast. I intended to visit and pay homage to the disciples of Ajaan Mun that I respected the most. By the start of the rainy season, I had reached Bon Tod Forest Monastery, where I bowed at the feet of Ajaan Maha Boowa and requested permission to spend the 1961 retreat period there. It was immediately apparent that Ajaan Maha Boowa had established a thriving community of forest monks, all of whom were striving to maintain the virtues of renunciation, strict discipline, and intensive meditation. Much like Ajaan Mun, Ajaan Maha Boowa had a reputation for being fierce and uncompromising with his students. He drilled into them the importance of practicing the bold meditation techniques that Ajaan Mun had championed. He was also uncompromising in his opposition to attempts to introduce worldly values into the monastic community. Refusing to practice in line with people's wishes and opinions, he held true to the principles of Dhamma and monastic discipline, and successfully maintained the monastery's atmosphere of concentrated focus. This strict attitude made me feel right at home. Ajaan Mun to caution monks against being influenced by worldly wishes and opinions that aren't based on Buddhist principles or ethical standards. Monks must remind themselves that lay life is a confining and dusty path, one that presents significant challenges to those seeking to tread the monastic path. The stability and strength of our religion have always depended on a community of monks who are completely dedicated to the practice of Buddhism and to teaching that path of practice to others. The stability and strength of the ordained Sangha, in turn, are dependent on its code of discipline, which is defined and governed by adherence to a set of precepts designed specifically for monastic living. Those rules outline a disciplined lifestyle that is ideally suited for practical application of the Buddha's teachings. Rather than expediently accepting the lower standards of worldly life, monks choose to adopt the higher principles enshrined in the monastic code of conduct. Otherwise, communities of practicing monks will lack harmony and discipline, and the religion will suffer as a result. A central tenet guiding forest Dhamma meditation practices states that true achievement on the Buddha's path emerges from an internal struggle that involves enormous effort, strict discipline, and unwavering determination. Regardless of one's preferred method of practice, any effort put into meditation that ignores these principles easily becomes aimless and hesitant, which can lead to more mental discord, not less. It is imperative to develop enough inner strength to fight against the powerful pushback that comes from the combined forces of greed, aversion, and delusion. When the battle lines are drawn in the heart, only the strongest practitioners will emerge victorious. When I arrived at his monastery, Ajaan Maha Boowa resided in a small bamboo hut with a thatched grass roof, tucked away at one side of the monastery in a shady grove of tall bamboo trees. Local villagers had just begun to construct a new hardwood residence for him, which they considered to be a more appropriate dwelling given his status as the abbot. I soon jumped right in, uninvited, to lend a hand. The locals were clearing the brush and digging the ground in preparation for laying a foundation. I joined them after the morning meal, raking and leveling the earth, and generally doing groundwork where the wooden posts would be placed. When the workers broke for lunch, I kept raking. When they quit in the afternoon to go home for the night, I had my sights set on working until midnight. I continued to pound the loose soil with a tree stump attached to poles to compact and level the site. After the sun set and dusk enveloped the work area, I pounded the ground by moonlight with such a single-minded focus on the task that I was oblivious to any disruption I might have been causing. Fed up with the constant racket at that quiet hour, Ajaan Maha Boowa soon appeared in the half-light. He showed surprise at finding me to be the culprit. In a reproachful tone, he said that if it were anyone else, he would kick them out of the monastery straight away. But since I'd lived and practiced with Ajaan Mun, he'd tolerate my behavior just this once. Is this how Ajaan Mun taught you? Was that what the Buddha taught his disciples? No, quite the opposite. Ajaan Maha Boowa continued his admonition, citing a story from the scriptures about a time when, one evening after dark, the Buddha heard a crowd of people making a loud commotion inside his monastery. The loud, unpleasant clamor sounded like traders noisily hawking their wares. The Buddha told the monk next to him to send the offenders home immediately, with the admonishment that their rowdy behavior at that late hour was detrimental to the monastery's peaceful, quiet environment. Conscientious people are thoughtful of the needs of others and choose to act accordingly. They do not suppose they have a right to disturb the quietude of dedicated practitioners. Practicing monks have the right to expect the monastery to be still and quiet during the evening hours. That is a time when they thrive in a calm and quiet meditation environment. Disturbing that silence wastes their time and causes them difficulties for no good purpose. Noisy activity, when necessary, can wait for daytime. In that instance, from the Buddha's time, the disturbance was caused by lay people. How much worse is the offense when the culprit is a monk? Having said that, Ajaan Maha Boowa quietly walked back to his hut. Early the next morning, I waited for Ajaan Maha Boowa to arrive at the main pavilion. After bowing respectfully to the Buddha statue, he sat down on the seat prepared for him. I quickly crawled over to where he sat and pulled one of his legs out from under him. Surprised, he demanded to know what I was up to. With tears running down my cheeks, I told him that I wished to bow down at his feet and pay my sincere respects to him. Looking Ajaan Maha Boowa straight in the eyes, I told him with a sense of wonder that when he reproached me the previous night, he sounded exactly like Ajaan Mun, both in his manner and his expression. I voiced heartfelt regrets about my behavior the night before, and confessed to being totally in the wrong. I submitted wholly to Ajaan Maha Boowa's authority because he so resembled Ajaan Mun, for whom I had undying reverence. In my entire life as a monk, I had felt afraid in the presence of only two monks, Ajaan Mun and Ajaan Maha Boowa. That's it. I would not dare to contradict their superior judgment. Much to my delight, I found out from Ajaan Maha Boowa that Ajaan Kao's forest monastery was situated on the western edge of Udon Thani province, just a few days' hike to the west. Ajaan Kao had been on my mind ever since I heard Ajaan Mun praise his virtuous character and high Dhamma attainment. The day I arrived at Longtime Cave Monastery, I encountered the assembly of monks seated neatly in a row on the floor of a large open-air cave. I crept to one end of the line and asked which monk was Ajaan Kao. One of the monks nodded down the line, indicating the head monk at the end. Other than appearing older than the rest, Ajaan Kao did not stand out by his appearance. He seemed to be treated with no special deference, as though he was just another elderly monk at the gathering. This casualness surprised me, and years of living with Ajaan Mun had ingrained in my heart what I considered to be the proper monastic etiquette for this occasion. Oblivious to the glances of everyone present, I humbly crawled on my knees down the line of monks until I reached Ajaan Kao and bowed 3 times at his feet. Facing Ajaan Kao on my knees with palms raised and a feeling of sincere awe and respect, I begged him to sternly discipline me should I do anything wrong or unseemly. I promised to humbly admit my faults. I asked only that he accept me as a disciple. Later, when I found the right opportunity, I approached Ajaan Kao with questions about his training methods. Since he was an elderly and experienced monk and I was still relatively young at that time, I relished every chance I had to learn from such a true master. At our first meeting, he inquired about the state of my meditation practice. After I described my meditation from the earliest stages to the last stage, he praised my effort and confirmed that my understanding was correct. Even though I had supreme confidence in my Dhamma attainments, I believed it was important for a junior monk to show deference to his elders with a humble attitude. I have often recounted this episode with Ajaan Kao to teach my disciples a lesson. Even though you may believe you are very proficient in meditation, be cautious about trusting your own assessments. Don't fall prey to complacency. Instead, test your understanding against that of an enlightened master. The same applies to body contemplation. Don't simply trust your own judgment. The body must be investigated from every possible angle until one is totally dismayed by the unpleasant reality of physical existence and no longer deludedly grasping the body as me or mine. Several years before my arrival, Ajaan Kao led a small group of Dhutanga monks on a trek across the forested mountains in Udon Thani province. When they reached Klong Pain Cave on the lower slopes of the western range, Ajaan Kao found the environment so conducive to meditative seclusion that he decided to settle in the area around the cave. Covered in thick jungle, the whole region was known for its massive boulders and overhanging cliffs. It was a place where caves dotted the landscape and tall, shady trees covered the hillsides. The location was so well suited to Ajaan Kao's temperament that he lived there comfortably for the remainder of his life. During the rainy season retreat that year, I volunteered to build a water reservoir for the monastery, one big enough to catch and hold a large quantity of rainwater for use in the dry season. As I've mentioned, I have a doggedly determined character. When I decide to do something, I put all my energy into completing the task with skill and efficiency, allowing nothing to stand in my way. When the project was nearing completion, I heard news of a big typhoon moving in, so I rushed to finish the work before the storm hit. As nightfall approached, all the monks retired to meditate, but my firmness of purpose was undaunted. I continued to pound rocks with a sledgehammer, breaking them up to line the bottom of the reservoir to prevent leakage during the heavy rainfall. Although the hammering made a loud noise, I pushed ahead undeterred. Such was the nature of my stubbornness. Eventually, Ajaan Kao heard the banging noises and came to investigate. He was not pleased. Why was I working at the wrong hour of the day? Didn't I learn anything from Ajaan Mun? If it wasn't for his respect for Ajaan Mun, he said he would have asked me to leave the monastery and never come back. I felt ashamed at being chastised for a breach of etiquette yet again. Softening his tone, Ajaan Kao proceeded to recount to me a vision that had made a profound impact on his approach to being a responsible leader in the monastic community. In the years before Dhutanga monks began to congregate around him to seek his guidance, Ajaan Kao had lived alone in a small forest hermitage, where he preferred to remain aloof and practice in solitude. Seated in meditation there one night, an image of Ajaan Mun appeared in his mind. In the vision, Ajaan Mun spoke to Ajaan Kao and informed him that he would soon become a respected teacher in the forest tradition and have numerous disciples. He proceeded to advise Ajaan Kao that he should prepare to be a role model for a new generation of practicing monks. In the vision, Ajaan Mun indicated that he had no doubts about Ajaan Kao's Dhamma attainment, but he wanted him to focus on setting an inspiring example for his disciples to follow. He should not assume that the purity of his intentions entitled him to behave in ways that might lead to misunderstanding or disharmony within the monastic community. To maintain his good standing as a leader, he must lead wisely by example and not rely merely on common knowledge about the monastic precepts to set the tone. Soon monks would be looking up to him for leadership and proper training, so he himself had to actively set the right standard. Then his disciples would feel confident that the practices he had taught them were correct and above reproach. Ajaan Kao understood that Ajaan Mun was referring not only to the codified rules of monastic discipline that a monk must observe, but also to the unwritten rules of good deportment that promote faith in skeptics and inspire further confidence in the faithful. He warned him that a teacher should not judge a disciple's conduct solely on the letter of the law and neglect appearances of impropriety that violate the spirit of the Buddha's teachings. In this regard, any discordant personal character traits that a monk exhibits, especially those that run counter to the welfare of the majority, must be firmly admonished by the teacher and brought under control. Ajaan Kao was told to guard his impeccable reputation so that others would say, his Dhamma virtue is exceptionally high. He is entirely beyond reproach. As Ajaan Kao spoke, I reflected on my own recent behavior and how it had caused a disturbance within the monastic community at Longtime Cave Monastery. Humbled and chagrined by my conduct, I apologized to Ajaan Kao for my failure to live up to the high standards maintained by all the great teachers of our tradition. I determined at that moment, with the purest of intentions, to reform my wayward tendencies. But, alas, stubborn determination was still an attitude that would often trip me up in the years to come.